Our dearly departed friend, Peter Mays. This is one of his paintings for a small tribute as well, and of course, film with which he so much dedicated his life. Before we dive into the full show, for those of you who are new to Filmforum, we're the city's longest running organization that screens experimental and avant-garde film, video art, documentaries, experimental animation, all artist-driven, handcrafted work. We're in our 44th year now, and we're collaborative and itinerant as well, but we most frequently screen here on Sunday nights. And we'll have part 2 of this series with Peter in 2 weeks on the 31st, looking at more of his video work from post-2000. Next week, there's another show that will be of interest, I believe, which are the films, the entire film work of Sarah Catherine Arledge. She was one of the important early experimental filmmakers in Southern California, one of the early women experimental filmmakers whose works go from the 40s through the late 70s. She had a similar screening with her film work in 1980 at Pasadena Filmforum, and had a very close relationship with the founders of Filmforum, Terry and Mary Cannon, and they'll be here to help introduce the show along with Irene Satsos, who's the head curator at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena. And at the Armory Center for the Arts right now is a really marvelous exhibition of Arledge's watercolors and slides and notes and the films in an installed way. And it's a really marvelous and eye-opening show. So please, and that's free of course, so if you can, make your way to Pasadena to see that show as well to help complete the Sarah Catherine Arledge experience. She was a really wonderful and important light. And then on April 7th, we're welcoming the filmmaker Ariana Gerstein from SUNY Binghamton from New York Way. She does just fantastic animation and experimental films. Several pieces use a scanner as a camera, and her methods and working with that and doing optically printing on film and combining it and going from the digital to the analog and optically printing and going back to digital just creates a body of work which is sort of without parallel at the moment. So hopefully you'll come to see those. Several of the films will have the LA premieres, and I think it might be her first time presenting in Los Angeles. So that's what's coming up. Peter, we were delighted to host in various ways through the years. He was really, a lovely person, a bit eccentric, a wonderful artist. When we did oral history at his apartment, he was in the midst of painting another series of work. We had a show dedicated to a set of his films in 2010 here, and also his ongoing work with the Single Wing Turquoise Bird Light Show, of which he was a co-founder and member all the way up until now. And it's really a great loss to our community to lose him. He was also founded a film screening organization at UCLA in 1962 to help screen those underground films coming out of New York City. He was a projectionist at the Fox Venice Theater. He was a regular attendee. He was a projectionist at CAA as well, which was probably a different kind of film, but that he was screening. But just an essential part of the community, and we'll miss him. So for tonight's show, what we're doing, one more announcement. There will be a memorial for him as well, not with films, but on Sunday, April 28th at a location to be announced on Facebook. So we'll keep an eye on it for that, and we'll probably know more by March 31st as well. So tonight's show, we're really delighted that we've been able to we're having both the world premiere of a new restored print from the Academy Film Archive, which just got completed 2 days ago. That's of the Star Curtain Tantra, the last film in the program. And also we're delighted to have David Lebrun sort of walk us through the evening with the words of Peter Mays. Peter Mays did this great cinema autobiography, is that what he called it? A Mouse Enigma, in which he talked about the various films he did through the years and other anecdotes of his life. And so with that, I think I would welcome David Lebrun to start hosting us through the evening. And I'll set this so.
Thank you all for coming. I met Peter more than 50 years ago when I was a UCLA film student and he was working on his first experimental feature, Sister Midnight. Together we were the film department of the Single-Wing Turquoise Bird Light Show at its inception in 1968 and later when the light show reformed in 2010 to create museum installations, gallery shows, and university residencies over the following 5 or 6 years. So I was pleased and honored when Adam asked me to help put together this 2-evening retrospective of his work. We've assembled 2 programs. The first is devoted to Peter's films of the 1960s, and the second to work mostly of the past decade. And that work is very different in appearance and everything else. Adam mentioned them as video work, but it's mostly work constructed using After Effects, constructed entirely inside the computer, but with the same kind of themes and obsessions that you'll see tonight. This first program shows a filmmaker figuring out for himself how celluloid can be used to make moving images, dealing very much with the physicality of film, inventing his own ways to shoot, develop, print, edit, and project, then sometimes refilming what he projects, working his way through the vocabulary of the silent and experimental film, silent era and experimental film, to find his own filmic language. In 2006, Peter wrote a filmic autobiography called Mouse Enigma, in which he writes about each of the films we'll show tonight. So I'll precede each film with some quotes about it from Peter's writing. Since he can't be here himself, this will allow his voice to be part of the proceedings. Early in the text, Peter writes, "My father was an avid cinematographer of his family, especially his children, who were forever growing. Christmas or birthday movies were made with a rented 8mm camera on Kodachrome. When I was 8, I was given a Kodascope projector with variable speed, as well as several black and white movies. A cowboy movie called Rustlers of Dry Gulch, a Simple Simon Fair cartoon, and a Mother Goose and the Old Shoe cartoon. In the end, my father's home movies were all magic. A family member walking along suddenly changed into another family member, then another, like the 4 footsteps of Maya Deren in Meshes of the Afternoon. In my first act as a filmmaker, I edited the cowboy movie, shortening it to suggest much greater violence and movement. And I read Eisenstein." And he goes on to talk about the first experimental film that he saw that had a huge impact on him was Kenneth Anger's Fireworks in the late 50s. And then getting his education in experimental film from Raymond Rohauer's screenings at the Coronet Theater. Quote, "A Sidney Peterson surreal film, The Lead Shoes of a Diver and the Sea, convinced me that avant-garde film is like seeing with the mind of a beast, a leopard, or even an elephant. I wanted mystery and shadows, veiled and dimly suggested things, smoky, dancing, flickering lights on water that became fire in a dark, flashing sea. I decided to work in 8mm so I could shoot extensively. I worked for several years on the machinery to develop and print 8mm black and white. Superior Bulk Film Company of Chicago supplied the stock. With my own contact printer, I could do more than a commercial lab, with long dissolves and process shots, printing negative on positive and reprinting on other action to create impossible metaphors on vision. To print the negative on positive stock, I initially used a 10-foot plank with small nails to hold the film and a traveling light pulled by my erector set motor. The result was hopelessly out of focus. I would need a piece of glass 10 feet by half an inch to make the contact. It was only then that I discovered the perforation, which allows each frame to be printed by the same precise gate. I modified an 8mm camera, put the unexposed stock in it, and fed the cut negative through velvet slits. I placed the device at the entrance to my closet so I could push the apparatus into the closet, close the door, open the camera in the dark, and process the film. At the beginning of a long, lonely summer vacation, I had plenty of equipment but no ideas. I decided to make an exercise film to warm up and settled on Durer's woodcuts of the apocalypse. Then I considered making the apocalypse myself. I created a dream space beyond my closet door, a dream space in which I played many roles since I was always on call. This gives the film a narcissistic quality like early Anger, Brakhage, and Deren. That's the end of the quote. The resulting first film is Vision, 1962. The whole film is about 25 minutes. I'm going to show you the second part, the raising of the dead and the judgment of the living and the dead. When I watched it for the first time a few weeks ago, it was a bit like rediscovering a lost silent film from the 1930s. Vision seems to owe a lot to Watson and Webber's 1933 film Lot in Sodom, one of its few companions in the genre of apocalyptic, biblical, silent experimental cinema. Lot in Sodom was a film that Peter and I later used in the light show, but I can't swear he'd seen it before making Vision. As far as I know, this is the second ever public screening of Vision. The reason for that I'll explain afterward. We'll be showing it in the only form we were able to find it, which seems to be an SD rephotography of an 8mm projected print. He photographed it off a screen. Hopefully the original will be located and the film restored at some point. So let's see Vision. Millimeter film, dimly printed, it ended with reel 1. They were waiting for the evening's headliner, Cocteau's Le Sang d'un Poète. The theater art students who in 1962 were having trouble accepting the innovations of Citizen Kane led in the derision. I felt like I was being crucified since I was on the screen nearly nude, revealed, etc. Vision has never been projected since. It may be the last film of the Pacific Coast Mystery Mirror Knife School, as beckoned in by Darren in anger and then banished by them for greater repast. End of quote. The next film is Stream, shot at and around a stream near a mountain cabin where Peter and his wife Judy lived in the summer of 1963. Peter writes, "The film was cut under the mantle of Stan Brakhage. I experimented a lot with intercut trains of single frames, resulting in a flashing continuity of two scenes seen at once, one panning left and one moving up, say. The film had something like a fugal structure, more driving than Brakhage, and more percussive, twisting, snorting, slowing, calming, then jumping around again like a snake. All these frames and short clips were mylar taped together. Moreover, I had to cut additional 8mm perforations into every frame of the 16mm mylar tape with a razor blade. Stream was blown up from 8mm Kodachrome to 16 ECO on a printer I built for the occasion for my Kodascope projector and Pathé camera. As time wore on, I cut more and more of the 16mm print, the slow, late afternoon dark forest, orange petals of light on deep, cold veined rocks. Jerry Katz was the only person who ever liked my leaf movie. He liked the black between the leaves." Now we come to Death of the Gorilla, 1964, 1965. "Among the experiments I tried," Peter writes, "was photographing the black and white TV through color filters. I quickly arrived at a procedure: shoot through one color filter, rewind the roll in a black bag, then shoot through another color, rewind again, 3 to perhaps 15 times. The random mix, captured on film, was often unbelievably beautiful. Now I could finally work with thousands of extras and exotic, expensive sets. John Hall and Maria Montez in Cobra Woman called for variegated hues. Pascal Petit in a French Cleopatra being delivered to the pharaoh in a rug was shot in gold and red. Mario Bava's Hercules in Atlantis, Mothra, King Kong, the Vikings, corpses rising from the grave, Tarzan and Jane, cities exploding, everything the low-budget filmmaker needed was delivered to the home nightly. After 8 months of TV schedules looking for really bad movies, I climaxed, achieving a superimposition passage in an Arabian Nights film in roses and tans. In its utter randomness, it was absolutely perfect. I cut weird little dramas out of the confused, multi-layered composites, like a blue woman in a sinking ship looking through a porthole and seeing red Egyptians having a doll orgy. A horse, a pentagram, and a green woman amid falling boulders frightened and disperse a Broadway King Kong audience, exploding people up a 4,000-mile volcano tube into an Atlantis set with magic rings twirling on a blue mirror table. Yvette Mimieux kisses a statue's toe as spacemen burst through flowers, cut to a sci-fire with red flying saucers destroying DC over a brain operation. The film ends with an apocalyptic destruction of Earth by meteorites from above and volcanoes from below. followed by Star Wars and Cold Moon Landing like death. In the end, a veiled Marlene Dietrich examines a necklace as if frames in a film, unquote. When we started the Single Wing Light Show in 1968, we'd all seen Death of the Gorilla many times, and I think the film had a significant impact on our aesthetic, which was based on creating fragmented dream narratives out of layered still film and abstract imagery. You'll be seeing it tonight in a restored print from the Academy Film Archives, kindly supplied by Mark Toscano. 1967, finished in the 80s, maybe. It was largely shot in 1967 and 1968 in a house above the Sunset Strip known as the Crest Hill House, where Peter lived with UCLA film students Bert Gershfield, Bruce Lane, and Terry Frugette, as well as Jeff Perkins and Fluxus artists from New York. Pat O'Neill had a 16mm printer in the basement. Various drugs were taken, various films were made, often in the house itself. Janis Joplin came and went, Roman Polanski fenced in the living room, and the Single Wing Turquoise Bird Light Show was formed in a meeting in an upstairs bedroom. Peter writes, quote, Bert and Jeff discovered a large house for rent on Crest Hill Drive just off the strip between Queens and Kings Roads. So we moved into the Crest Hill house, which may be where John Houseman lived in the 40s, based on a description of a meeting with Raymond Chandler for the script of The Blue Dahlia. Maya Deren shot Meshes of the Afternoon just up Kings Road. The Crest Hill house was built on a hillside with several levels. There were 3 basements. I took a small room much like a monk's cell off the living room. Jeff and Bert took larger bedrooms in the upper level which communicated with the street. Bruce and Larry, a dwarf, took the smallest room off the kitchen. Larry lived under a card table and did not pay rent. He was also the star of Bruce's film Journal of Albion Moonlight, based on Kenneth Patchen's book, which is another unfinished film. I had a large number of unexposed rolls of Anscochrome, and I began shooting the house and some of the goings-on, which became the core of Astral Man, unquote. It's interesting that Peter refers to Meshes of the Afternoon. Astral Man actually reminds me of that film. A woman approaches a Spanish house in the hills. Strange things happen inside. The house is approached and entered again and again. The film was edited in the 1980s when Peter was living in Topanga. He writes, quote, due to happenstance, I had multiple prints of much of the material, and so incidents could be repeated, perhaps in a degraded form, just as memories can be called up again and again. The cyclical structure seems to express over time what the arches and spirals of the house expressed in space. Astral Man was largely formed by the end of the decade, unquote. The whole film is over 40 minutes long and includes long sections shot in Topanga in the 80s. For tonight, I've put together 2 sections of the film revolving around the 60s, the light show and the Crest Hill house, totaling about 20 minutes. It ends with a fade out and no end credits, and the excerpts from Astral Man will be followed by the final film of the evening, without a break, Star Curtain Tantra. The original film Star Curtain was made in 1965-66 and originated with hand-painted film strips, bipacked and projected on Peter's wife Judy's nude body and then refilmed. This was combined with other layers, including a section of nudie films run back and forth through a 60mm movie scope and then rephotographed through gels. In 1969, Peter added a second half, adding material shot and gathered for the light show, as well as reusing the original hand-painted material, and retitled the film Star Curtain Tantra. This version was screened at the San Francisco Film Festival in 1970. Thanks to the efforts of Mark Toscano, the film has been newly restored by the Academy for this screening, and tonight is the premiere of the restored print. So enjoy the rest of the program, and please join us in 2 weeks for part 2. I'd love to know about it. There's some very familiar looking faces, but I have no idea who any of them are.
Oh, Larry's in there.
What?
Larry is in there.
Larry's the dwarf.
The dwarf.
Yeah, recognized. And Peter Mays, but beyond that, there's a bunch of people in that party scene that seem very archetypal 60s people, but I don't know who they are.
And otherwise, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week or in 2 weeks. 2 weeks for part 2 with Peter's works, and next week for Sir Catherine Arledge. And well, thank you all.
Just so you know, the 16 in here is dim.